Hello, Namaste. I'm Dr. Satyam here. We are going to study the tutorials of Yin Yoga and we are going to talk about what is Yin Tissue. It's very important to understand what is Yin Tissue because the entire process of doing Yin Yoga is totally dependent on this question, what is Yin Tissue and what are these tissues on which we are actually going to work. So it plays a very important role to understand what are Yin tissues. We are doing Yang Yoga like Hatha Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, Vinyasa Yoga, where we are using a lot of muscles, a lot of heart pumping, blood to move in each and every skeletal muscle. So we do a lot of cardio, we do a lot of posture, we do a lot of joint strengthening practices, but something is lacking because of which many people do get injuries. So if we age, if we get injured, if we have some issues, and then also if we want to do yoga, is it something like we cannot do yoga? Or yoga is not safe for us? In that condition, can we do some yoga postures or practices which can strengthen our body parts? So all these questions are actually answered when we start talking about Yin Yoga. So when we are doing Yin Yoga, we are actually working on Yin tissues. So question starts, what is Yin tissue? So let me share my write-up, my screens to make you all understand that what is Yin tissue and on which we are going to really work. Right? So what we find here is looking into Yin tissues, we understand that it is all about the practices or movement which we say by which we do yoga poses, compression, stretch, twist. So when we are doing all these practices like back bend, forward bends, we are working on the same practices of stretch, twist, compression. Right? We are providing the shearing force between the vertebra and the ribs to create these kind of practices. In all these practices, which can be Ashtanga or Hatha or Vinyasa, what are we trying to do is, we are working on poses to let the toxins release. We are working on these postures to make sure that the old scar tissues, which can be broken down and can be removed out of the body. So through removing these deep blockages of energy, we are actually promoting our health. But at one point of time, what we need is proper flexibility. We need that when we are doing the posture, the resistance which is stopping the posture, that has to be long lasting, because that is what we call it as less aging. We have the limitation in the flexibility, which means our muscle fibers are still toned and these tendons and compressions are still allowing our body to be more safer. As we grow older, this flexibility starts becoming lesser. We also call that condition where the entire muscle fibers become less active and they have less flexibility. We call it as atrophy. So in order to work on this flexibility, what do we need? We need the better understanding of the fascia, which is an important part of our tissues. Understanding of fascia, understanding of ligaments, understanding of tendon. Yang yoga in one way is really very good for cardio, for opening the limits, but to work on this state of atrophy where we need the safe opening of the joints, and especially into the later part of our age, we need Yin tissues that can help us better. So when we look into our tissue, what we find that we have different segments of tissues like epithelial tissue, nervous tissue, muscle tissue, connective tissue. So all together, Yang tissue might be working on nervous tissue, muscle tissue, and epithelial tissue, but Yin tissue is in yoga is actually working on connective tissue. So in one way, if you ask a question that exactly can we say that in yoga is working on connective tissue or in tissues are none other than connective tissue, so the answer can be yes also, that in tissue can also be connective tissues. Right? So it is these connective tissues on which we are actually working, because these connective tissues are the one which are binding. They are the one which are holding the joints up and down. Connective tissues, they respond to stimuli, and which can be jogging, jumping, running, excitement, and in all times they are responsible for creating the matrix which can support your joints. That extracellular matrix which can support the joints. So when we are working on in tissues, we are working on these connective tissues which are responsible for safety of the joints. So connective tissues, when we say, they are having a major component of fascia, and this fascia along with other fat cells, along with ligaments and tendons, which creates flexibility and resistance, they are our in tissues. So if you look into this picture, what you see is, you see fat cells, you see lymphocytes, you see elastin fibers, which means cushionary material as a fat cells, elastin fibers you find here, collagen fibers you find, reticular fibers you find. So you find all these things there, which are the part of connective tissue, and these part of connective tissues are our yin tissues, which are going to help, working into the muscle. Of course, when we do Hatha yoga or Ashtanga yoga or Vinyasa yoga, fast yoga, we are working on the muscle bundle. But do you know that this muscle bundle is made up of small fibers, muscle fibers, and these small muscle fibers are made up of myofibrils. And these myofibrils are made of myofilaments. Very tiny structure can be seen from electron microscope. So when we say that I am working on in tissues, actually I am working on myofilaments and myofibrils, very tiny cells, which I want with the help of my yoga to protect them. And if I need to protect them, I need to do that yoga which is more stable, slow, holding for longer time, and that kind of yoga is none other than in yoga. So we are working on these levels by working on myofilaments. We have different kind of muscles in our body. See, we have skeletal muscles, cardiac muscles, smooth muscles, and we are continuously pumping blood to these muscles, and then we are trying to develop the tonicity of these muscles, where we have a limitation. We need to understand that where do we need to stop. Where do we need to stop is an important factor. And to understand where do we need to stop, that understanding we can get by the help of nerve. This junction where the nerve is connecting to the muscle, we call it as proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. I repeat, PNF. This junction is called as proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. So when we are creating certain stretch slowly, we are actually training these PNF receptors regularly. And as we train these PNFs regularly, we actually start learning, or we can say that we are actually teaching our muscles how long they can stretch safely, so that they don't get injured. Not only that, we are majorly interested in stretching in a series. Stretching in a series. We are not interested in parallel. Parallel like a bodybuilder. We make big muscle, thick muscle. We are not interested in that. But we are interested in longer muscles. We call it as not parallel series, but parallel, but mostly on the series. So what happens is we are stretching the sarcomere. So our major practices in yoga is not eccentric or concentric, but majorly isometric. Many people do ask that Don't you feel that it is so boring and you are working on an isometric contraction? Why is it so important for you to work on that? Because we are not doing yoga for fun, and we are not doing yoga for just for what we call it as fantasy, but we are doing yoga for the health benefit. And when we say that when we are doing yoga for the health benefit, we need to understand that as we age, our ROM, which is range of motion, starts becoming lesser, and we start having more of fat cells rather than fiber cells and collagen cells, and slowly we have lesser motor units, which leads to atrophy, and we reach into wheelchair bound condition also at some time. So with the help of Yin Yoga, if we don't use it, we will start losing it. So we need to understand that why are we actually doing yoga? In the process of doing yoga, we should not forget the reason why we are doing yoga. In the process of doing Yin Yoga, we should not forget that why exactly I have chosen Yin Yoga, and why Yin Yoga is going to be a long-term yoga for us. Because we are working on the muscle and fascia, which is binding our muscles. This is the fascia, which is the one which is having facial bags like sponge bags and prevents us from any kind of injury. If you go into the detail of fascia, you will find that fascia actually means nothing but the bandage. It is bandaging your blood vessels, it is bandaging your muscles, it is bandaging your bones, it is bandaging your ligaments, tendons. Every small to the small fiber is bandaged by fascia. And this fascia also has stuffs like collagen and elastin fibers, which keeps on contracting to make sure that we don't really harm our major tissues, which means altogether fascia becomes our 3D shock absorbing facility inside our body. You can read these notes. These notes are available for you to read more. But when I'm teaching, I'm trying to explain to you the essence of each slide. So what do you understand here is that each and every particle inside your body, which can be a fiber, which can be a blood vessel, which can be a bone, which can be a ligament, it is all coated by fascia, which is on the superficial as well as in the deeper level. So the deep fascia also covers, and it is bandaging everything. So you can look into the transaction part where you can see the yellow whitish part, which is nothing else but the superficial and the deep fascia, which is there to protect us. So everywhere the bandages happen. Not only bandaging is important, lubrication is important, because when one tissue is rubbing another tissue, there should not be any extra friction, but because the friction will create more injury. Along with that friction, we need a lot of fibers. So this deep fascia helps in developing more and more fibroblasts, which are fibers, so that when we are contracting our muscles, when we are stretching our muscles, and if we lose some fibers, we can make more fibers. Ultimately, what happens to many conditions when we don't make new fibers, we end up having fibromyalgia conditions like that. But when we do Yin Yoga, these chances become minimalized or almost becomes none. So myofibroblast comes with the combination of interstitial cell, because when we do deep stretching of in yoga and we hold it for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, so our endothelial cells will start producing endo-MT. The bone marrow will start producing fibroblasts, epithelial cells will come, interstitial cell fibroblasts will come, and ultimately the essence of everything will make myofibroblasts. So these myofibroblasts at the end results into a complex structure. We call it as myofibrotendon complex, which is responsible for the development of better quality of collagen fibers. We all know collagen is an anti-aging fiber. On our face, ears, in our cartilage, between our bones, everywhere is collagen, and this collagen has longer shelf life, half-life period. It sustains longer, it is there for longer time. So collagen helps in making sure that our cartilage, our meniscus, all this can last longer. And that's how we are not only trying to be healthy, but in one way, with the help of fascia, myofascial tendons, and collagen fibers, we are actually developing longevity, lubrication, force transmission and cushion. All these things are being taken care. So ultimately, if fascia is everywhere, we can develop collagen everywhere. If fascia is everywhere, we can develop myofibroblast tendon complex everywhere. And that's how we can have more and more stronger ligaments and tendons. We should not forget one thing, that ligaments and tendons, they are more of dry tissues, especially the ligaments. Tendon is still connected to the muscle to some extent, so it is still somehow juicy to some extent, but ligament is a totally dry tissue and the chances of pull and tear is very high in that area. And that's the reason why we get ligament pull or ligament tear, tendon pull, etc. The reality is, because tendon is connected to the muscle, because tendon is a structure which is connecting muscle to the bone. So it is in between. So because it is connected to the muscle, so tendon keeps changing into a better version of itself if we are actually doing myofascial training, if we are doing in yoga myofascial training, if we are doing in yoga training, etc. Whereas the ligament is not very easy to change. It is a very dry structure, but when we keep on working on that, the chances of flexibility and longevity starts becoming longer. The damage becomes lesser. Otherwise, the ligaments with old age, they damage very easily. They go through a lot of contractures. The limitations become high, and this leads to other problems in the joints, which includes dryness inside the joints, which includes arthritis in longer time. So, in one way, with the help of Yin Yoga, when we are working on Yin tissues, we are working to prevent conditions like arthritis. We are working to prevent conditions like arthritis. So we have to work on each and every joint, which means Yin Yoga is not for only one or two parts of your body, but Yin Yoga is for all parts of the body, because of your body has joints, and joints are of different types. Cartilaginous and fibrous joints are also available. These joints are very stiff joints. Fibrous joints don't move. Cartilaginous joint move, but it is very stiff joint. Synovial joint has more movement, of course. But again, because it has more movement, it has more chances of getting wear and tear. So there are different kind of joints: synovial joints, fibrous joint, cartilaginous joint. Even in synovial joints, we have different kind, which is sliding joints, gliding joints, saddle joints, ball and socket joints, hinge joints, etc., etc. So ultimately, what we are working with the help of Yin Yoga is inside the joint capsule, where there is liquid. This liquid is found by the plasma, the tissue fluid of your body, and this tissue fluid gets increased when you hold the pose for longer time. So the cells, the surrounding cells of your joint starts releasing this kind of fluid, and that makes the synovial fluid. So which means with the help of Yin Yoga, you are not only safely exercising the joint, but you are also giving the chance to increase the liquid flow inside. Range of motion, of course, is good. With that, stiffness becomes lesser. And when we work longer on this area, we are also helping to develop the quality-wise bones and cartilage. Because bones and cartilage are made up of electrolytes, and these electrolytes come through the blood. So when we do poses, the blood rushes more to this part, and because the blood is rushing more to this part, there will be more electrolytes, there will be more good tissues, there will be more minerals, and these minerals will make more good quality bones. With cartilage, which is a combination of electrolytes and collagen, comes with the help of fascia. So ultimately, fascia bonds, cartilage, and electrolytes, when they come together, we make proper bone structure, and we make proper cartilaginous structure. People do ask, like, how bones are altogether made. We have to explain to them that bones are not just a plastic structure. Inside, we have a hollow space where we have a lot of blood supply. And when we do the poses and we hold the poses for a longer time, these blood vessels release a lot of minerals. And ultimately, with the help of collagen fibers, the minerals can also make more and more cartilage. So ultimately, When we talk about what are in tissues, so it is all about understanding that the in tissues are not just some ligaments and tendons, but in tissue is a combination. In tissue is a combination of ligaments, tendons, synovial fluid, fascia, myofilaments, myofascial tendon complex, collagen. So when all these tissues are being taken care, which ultimately increases the range of motion, which is actually required at certain age. So that is what we are actually trying to do with the help of Yin Yoga. So Yin Yoga works on in tissues. And because Yin Yoga works on in tissues, we are doing it for the health benefit. And that's how Yin Yoga is going to continue with us till the long last part of our life. Thank you very much for learning this tutorial. We'll do the next chapter in the next video. Thank you very much.